5 things your glorified body will never experience again. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. Revelation 21:4. Read that verse slowly enough, and something in you exhales, because you know exactly what former things means. It means the ache that greets you before your feet even hit the floor. It means the appointment you've already had 3 times this year. It means the strength you used to have without thinking about it and don't have any more. Most of us have made peace with that. We've quietly decided this is just what a body does over time. It gets tired, it breaks down, it fails a little more every year. But Scripture never calls that normal. It calls it a curse. One moment in a garden, one fracture in everything God made good, and every ache you carry today traces back to that same wound. Here's what most Bible teaching never sits with long enough to explain. God didn't just promise to ease that curse, He promised to end it, not one part of it. 5. And the proof isn't a theory. The proof already happened. A body already walked out of a tomb, completely untouched by everything that curse ever did, and that resurrection is the pattern for yours. By the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what your body will never carry again, and why the last one is the one that changes how you see the rest of your life. Before we go any further, take a second right now. Like this video. Subscribe to Secrets of Heaven, because what I'm about to show you, you are going to want to come back to. Let's start with the first one, pain. And there's a woman in Scripture who carried it deeper than almost anyone else, though you rarely hear her name from a pulpit. Her name was Naomi. Ruth, chapter 1. She left her homeland with a husband and 2 sons. She came back with none of them. Famine took her away from Bethlehem. Death brought her home alone. Her husband died first. Then, years later, both her sons, in a foreign land, far from everything familiar. When she finally walked back into Bethlehem, the women there recognized her face and said her name out loud. "Is this Naomi?" And she said something most Bible teaching skips right past. "Call me not Naomi," which means pleasant. "Call me Mara," which means bitter. For the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. That's Ruth 1:20. Here's what's easy to miss. The word translated bitter there is the Hebrew word Mara, the same root used for the bitter waters at Marah in Exodus. Waters the Israelites couldn't drink because the pain in them was too sharp to swallow. Naomi wasn't being dramatic. She was naming something precise. Her whole identity had been renamed by grief. Maybe you know that feeling. The chair at the table nobody sits in anymore. Reaching for the phone to call someone before you remember you can't. Pain like that doesn't come from nowhere. Scripture traces it all the way back to Genesis 3, the moment sin entered, and with it sorrow, thorns, and a world that now hurts by default. That's the root. Every ache since is a branch off that same tree. But here's where Christ enters. Not at the end of Naomi's story, but as the answer to it. Isaiah 53:3 calls him a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. He wept at a grave he was about to empty. He bled in a garden before he ever reached the cross. And when he rose with a body that had passed all the way through suffering and come out on the other side of it, whole. Revelation 21:4 promises what that means for you. No more pain. Not less pain, not manageable pain, none. Think of it like a wound that finally closes without leaving a scar behind, not stitched shut, not healed over rough, gone as if it never happened. That's tier 1. Scripture states it plainly. If the ache you're carrying tonight feels like it's become part of who you are, the way Naomi's grief became her new name, hear this. That name doesn't follow you into glory. Whatever bitter thing rewrote you, it will not have the final word over your body or your story. Type it with me, never again. Now let's talk about something almost nobody wants to say out loud. The fear that your best years are behind you, and every year from here just costs you a little more. There's a man in Scripture who refused to accept that. His name was Caleb. Joshua chapter 14. Caleb is 85 years old. 45 years earlier, he'd been one of only 2 spies who trusted God's promise about the land. He waited nearly half a century, through wilderness, through burying an entire generation, for that promise to finally come due. And when it does, listen to what he says. I am this day 85 years old. As yet I am as strong this day as I was in the day that Moses sent me, as my strength was then, even so is my strength now, for war. That's Joshua 14:10-11. The Hebrew word behind strength there is coach. It doesn't just mean physical power. It carries the sense of vital capacity, the ability to still do what you were made to do. Caleb wasn't bragging, he was testifying. Decades of waiting hadn't drained him, it had proven him. If you're the one now double-checking the label on a prescription bottle, or noticing stairs feel different than they used to, you know what it is to watch capacity quietly leave the body 1 year at a time. That decline traces back to the same curse as everything else. Genesis 3 didn't just introduce sorrow, it introduced decay, dust returning to dust. But Christ's resurrected body broke that pattern specifically. He didn't rise weaker than he lived. Luke 24 shows him walking, eating, teaching, his body fully capable, resurrection life, not slowly fading life. Philippians 3:21 says, He will change our vile body, that it may be fashioned like unto his glorious body. Not a body that finally stops declining, a body incapable of decline at all. Scripture doesn't describe every sensation of that. That part is tier 2, a promise we trust without a full blueprint. But the trajectory is stated plainly. Whatever aging has been quietly taking from you, one day it simply stops taking. Like a debt that isn't refinanced, but paid off completely, no more interest accruing against your body ever again. Drop your first name and the city you're watching from right now. I want to see how far this reaches tonight. Here's the one so many of us are living inside of right now. Not a passing illness, but the kind that becomes part of your calendar. Another appointment, another set of labs, another doctor saying the same thing a little differently than last time. There's a king in Scripture who faced that exact moment, and you don't hear his story nearly as often as you should. His name was Hezekiah. 2 Kings chapter 20. He was sick unto death. The prophet Isaiah came and told him plainly, Set your house in order, for you shall die and not live. Hezekiah didn't argue theology. He turned his face to the wall and wept. That's not a footnote. That's a man staring straight at his own mortality, with nothing left to perform for anyone. And God answered, not with a vague comfort, but with a number. 15 more years. 2 Kings 20:5-6 records God's own words. I have heard thy prayer. I have seen thy tears. I will heal thee. The Hebrew word there is Rapha, the same root behind the name Jehovah Rapha, the Lord who heals. It's not a word for managing symptoms, it's a word for restoration, for making whole what was broken down to its foundation. Sickness, like everything else on this list, traces back to a body no longer functioning the way it was created to. The curse didn't just bring death eventually, it brought a body that could fail long before that. Christ's resurrection answers sickness specifically because his body, once raised, was never sick again. Never vulnerable to a single virus, infection, or diagnosis for the rest of eternity. And 1 Corinthians 15:20 calls him the first fruits, meaning what happened to his body is the pattern for what happens to yours. Revelation 21:4 says it plainly again, Neither shall there be any more pain, and the verse before it removes death and sorrow and crying from the picture entirely. Tier 1, stated, not implied. If you're the one who stopped being surprised by bad news at appointments, hear this the way Hezekiah heard it. God sees the tears you cry alone in a waiting room, and one day there won't be a waiting room left to sit in. If you believe that, say it with me again, never again. Last one for today, weakness. The strength you used to have without thinking about it, and don't anymore. There's a judge in Scripture who knew that feeling before he ever became known for courage. His name was Gideon. Judges chapter 6. God calls him a mighty man of valor. And Gideon's response is almost embarrassing in how honest it is. My family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. He wasn't being humble for effect. He genuinely believed he was the weakest person in the room God could have picked. Here's what's easy to miss in the Hebrew. The word God uses for Gideon, mighty man of valor, is Gibor Chayil. It's the exact same phrase used for elite warriors elsewhere in Scripture. God wasn't describing who Gideon currently was. He was declaring who Gideon was about to become before the evidence existed. That's a specific kind of weakness, not just physical fatigue, but the quiet fear that you don't have what it takes anymore, and maybe never did. Weakness, like the rest, traces to the same fracture in Genesis 3, a body and a spirit no longer operating at full strength, this side of Eden. And this is where Christ meets it directly, not by never being weak. Scripture says he grew weary at a well, he needed sleep in a storm-tossed boat. His body gave out physically, carrying his own cross. He knows weakness from the inside. But his resurrected body was raised in what Scripture calls power. 1 Corinthians 15:43, sown in weakness, raised in power. Like a body finally set down after a long shift. No more running on what's left, no more pushing past empty. That's Tier 1, stated directly about the resurrection body. And Philippians 3:21 extends the same promise to yours. Before we go any further into what's coming next, take a second and make sure you've liked this video and subscribe to Secrets of Heaven, because what's left is the one most of you came here for. Comment below, in one word, which of these 5 do you long to be free of the most? I'll be reading every one. We've covered pain, aging, sickness, weakness. There's one left, and it's the one you've quietly feared your whole life. There's one left, and it's the one you've quietly feared your whole life, even if you've never said it out loud. There's a man in Scripture who died twice, in a sense, and almost nobody teaches his story next to this topic. His name was Lazarus of Bethany. John chapter 11. He wasn't just sick, he died. His sisters, Mary and Martha, watched it happen. They buried him. 4 days passed, long enough that by the time Jesus arrived, Martha said plainly, "Lord, by this time he stinketh." No softening it. No polite distance from the reality of a body in the grave. And Jesus stood outside that tomb and did something Scripture records with striking simplicity. He wept. John 11:35. 2 words, the shortest verse in the Bible, and maybe the most human. God, standing in front of death, grieving it. Then he said 4 words that changed everything. "Lazarus, come forth." And he did. Here's what's easy to miss. Lazarus walking out of that tomb wasn't the final answer to death. It was the sign pointing toward it. Lazarus would die again one day. He was resuscitated, not glorified. His body went back into the ground eventually, waiting, like every believer before and since, for something greater than resuscitation. That something greater has a name. Genesis 3 tells us why death exists at all. Dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. It was never part of the original design. It was the last and heaviest branch of the curse. That something greater has a name. Genesis 3 tells us why death exists at all. Dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. It was never part of the original design. It was the last and heaviest branch of the curse. And Christ's resurrection didn't just answer death the way Lazarus's did. It ended death's authority altogether. 1 Corinthians 15:20 says it directly. Christ is risen from the dead and become the first fruits of them that slept. Not a sign, not a preview, the first of a harvest. Meaning, what happened to his body is now the guarantee of what happens to every body that belongs to him. Verses 54 through 57 of that same chapter say it, with a kind of holy defiance. Death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is thy sting? O grave, where is thy victory? That's not a question anyone's still waiting to answer. That's Tier 1, stated plainly, already settled at the empty tomb. Think of it like a debt that isn't refinanced, isn't postponed, isn't managed with smaller payments. Paid in full, permanently. Death doesn't get to collect from you again. If you're the one who's quietly thought about your own last breath more than you'd ever admit to anyone in your life, hear this gently and hear it as truth, not as comfort dressed up to sound nice. That fear does not get the final word. Revelation 21:4 said it from the beginning of this video, and it's still true right now. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, for the former things are passed away. Pain, aging, sickness, weakness, death, hive things traced to one curse and one risen body that has already walked free of all five. That's what Paul meant calling Christ the first fruits. He isn't just proof that resurrection is possible. He's the guarantee that yours is coming exactly the way his already happened. So if you're carrying an ache tonight, or a diagnosis, or a fear you've never said out loud, you are not carrying it forever. Whatever this body has cost you, that cost is not the end of your story. Naomi got a new name. Caleb got new strength. Hezekiah got more years. Gideon got more courage than he believed he had. Lazarus got his life back for a season. But you, if you belong to Christ, you get what none of them received in full. A body like his, untouched, unbreakable, home. If this reached something in you tonight, don't keep it to yourself. Like this video, subscribe to Secrets of Heaven, and share it with someone who needs to hear that none of this, the pain, the years, the sickness, the weakness, none of it gets the last word. Christ already walked out of that tomb, and one day, so will you.